Okay, so we're going to have a little think now about relational trauma, and we're thinking about regression. We're going to think about how how stuckness might show up in the therapeutic space and how you might be able to support that. Now, there are obviously many other factors that might cause stuckness, might cause a child to have not worked through those stages sequentially. We've identified medical trauma. There are many reasons. However, for the purposes of this workshop and the way that we are starting to think about, our work being relational, and that if there has been relational trauma, then that is very likely going to have an impact on the child's capacity to develop through those stages without it being attended to in relationship. So we just want to clarify what we mean by relational trauma, because relational trauma can lead to developmental trauma. But in and of itself, relational trauma it occurs within the relationship with a caregiver who is unsafe or it does not provide the caregiving that that child needed at whichever stage the trauma occurs. It's repetitive, so there's a consistent piece. It's not just, a one-off slip on the behalf of the caregiver. And if there are, we can see that if there is chronic experience over time, then it's going to impact on attachment, the capacity for self-regulation, and the child's development, whether that is their neurological development, which is whether it is their physiological, somatic development. It can have a real impact all over. For the purposes of EPR, one of the results can be stuckness, being stuck in an earlier stage because they haven't had the opportunity to move through those stages sequentially. And so this shows up as regression, which is what we talked about before. So we're now going to be looking at this model through a sort of relational trauma lens and thinking about what is it that we can do with that. So we wanted to start by just having a little look at the stages of development in terms of EPR, the neural development that occurs, and the trauma response that might result if there has been relational trauma during any of these phases. So whilst prenatal dramatic relationship is not part of the EPR model. It's obviously highly important, as we've said, for a number of reasons. First circle of attachment. So we do need to have, we do need to be thinking about this. And, we know that this is a highly sensitive time in terms of neural development, particularly sensitive to maternal stressors, to teratogens, which are any invasive environmental factors that might be caused, such as, drug and alcohol intake or medications, or, teratogens is something which comes into the fetus's system and has an impact on them as a result of it because the baby can't process it. So we've got rapid development going on here, as one can imagine. If during that period of time where this contain and hold, there was not that circle formed for the fetus during this highly sensitive time, then Jennings talks that the script, so we're looking at this through a dramatic lens, the script of safety and attunement might not be laid down strongly enough. So, even though this has happened in utero, we can see that the importance she places on that, and obviously stress regulation will be impacted. So, so that's sort of pre-EPR, if you like.
And Tara, I'm
Yeah.
reminded here just very quickly of the HPA axis that
Yes.
we know that maternal stress, the HPA axis for the mother is impacted. So we're thinking about here, adrenaline and cortisol, and therefore we know then that the HPA axis of the baby, the unborn, is also going to be impacted, and then we can start to consider sort of high stress levels,
Hmm.
high kind of adrenaline, high cortisol, which we know can have a significant impact. We know that sometimes some of you would have heard the terminology of corrosive cortisol. We know that this can significantly affect development. So it is incredibly important. And again, there may be a curiosity question there in terms of the intake meeting with the parent.
Mm. So let's think about the embodiment stage here. So, from a neural perspective, we know that there is right hemisphere dominance that continues up until about the age of 3, actually. But this is all about the non-verbal communication, and that those pathways, co-regulation, so very important. And again, we can start to see, I mean, the polyvagal theory, sort of these have been developed alongside one another in terms of models, but we can start to see about, you know, the holding that we refer to, and that containment from a polyvagal or nervous system lens. We're looking at co-regulation, and that if that doesn't happen, then, as Karen has already said, the trauma response to this stage would be either clinginess or overdependence. So when a child has been overheld, um, or bodily disconnection, as Karen explained. So underheld. And so we're thinking about interoception there. We're thinking about the child in the therapy room's capacity to know what their body is doing, what their body needs. And there might also be intrusive memory if there was any physical harm, whether that's sexual abuse or physical hurts, and how that is held in the body. So that is, at this stage, there won't be memory of that in terms of, explicit remembering, but the body keeps the score. We know that. So the trauma response is going to be all held in the body, depending on whether the baby's body, the container, the child had the opportunity to become embodied, as Karen described, be aware of their body.
Mm. And we see some children who are not aware of their bodies and they don't understand how their bodies work. And I know we're going to look a little bit later on how we might respond and reflect, but it's really significant. For example, a child who has a runny nose
Mm,
and just does not seem to be aware of their runny nose. And you think, oh my goodness me, are they not aware? Can they not feel this, out of their nose? Through this lens, we could hypothesize that actually no, because they haven't got a sense of their body. They don't know how their body works. So this running down their face um,
mm,
is something that they're just not connecting to. And it could belong to anybody because it doesn't belong to them because they have no sense of their body. And you know the best response in that as a therapist is actually for you to use your body in that instance and say to the child, oh, I can really notice something here on your face. So you're a mirror to that child,
mm,
and then you have a tissue and you wipe your face rather than giving the tissue to the child or wiping the nose for them. You mirror this action so they start to get a sense, oh, this is how my body might work too.
mm,
But we can think about them body fluids, can't we? In
mm,
terms of perhaps children who are incontinent through this lens. We're not talking about those children who have medical difficulties, etc. But through this lens, we can think, ah, I wonder why they have incontinence.
mm,
I wonder why they have a lot of saliva in their mouth when they talk. I wonder why they have a lot of, liquid coming from their nose. Those are the things that we can be thinking about here.
Or withholding, work with a number of children who withhold going to the toilet.
Mm, that's
That is a terrifying experience for them, even at ages 8, 9, 10, 11, because they've never felt ownership of
yeah,
their body.
yeah,
Um, so yeah. So in the projection stage then, and I've actually noticed an error on our thing here. It should sort of be more than 24 months, so apologies for that. But so this is sort of 12 going up to 3 or 4 years of age. Here we're thinking in terms of neural development, there's still right hemisphere dominance, so it's still very much emotional attunement, nonverbal communication that is really developing. The limbic system is expanding further and further. Impulse control is starting to come into play, so we're thinking there about starting to be able to utilize the containment that has been offered and the borders that have been offered by the parents. So through a polyvagal lens, we're looking co-regulation might be leading to times of self-regulatory capacity. Um, but in order for that to occur, the child has to have an awareness of their own inner states. How am I feeling? What is making me feel like this? And where that hasn't happened for the child, where they haven't had the experience of being, you know, being contained and allowing their feelings and their thoughts to be experienced, we might be moving into a child who is not able to externalize their inner state safely. They're not allowing themselves to have feelings, to experience things, or they might become. It might be too much. There might be a huge amount of affect here, and there might be a lot of externalizing. And we can see that that might be a push into overwhelm. So the child becomes activated very, very quickly. Again, we can think about this through a polyvagal lens. Um, so through this, we're thinking about how a trauma response to a rupture or an unfinished or an uncared for projection stage is really going to be about regulatory capacity, expression of themselves. Who am I? Where am I? Do I, can I do it? Again, we can think about Erickson, and it all comes together.
mm,
But, as we've said, what we love about this model is that it brings all of that together and it starts to think for us as therapists about how is the child leaving their mark, as you've said, making their mark in the therapy space.
yes. And through a trauma lens, often whether the child is externalized or not is internalized, but either way, they're frightened. They're
Yes.
frightened of their the expression of their body,
Hmm. Hmm.
and because the safety has been lacking and containment has been lacking.
So then, lastly, if we look at role, here we see that we're starting to develop, the prefrontal executive function, the thinking brain, if for want of a better word, I shouldn't really say that because the whole brain is a thinking brain, but the perspective taking part. And when Karen was talking about role before, we can see that, this is essential because now we're moving into a position where children who've had healthy developmental process are starting to, think about the other and step into and give roles and all that sort of thing. So the corpus callosum is starting to integrate here. We've got left hemisphere, right hemisphere balance is coming in. But if this period isn't attended to, then what we might see is rigidity, fixed neural patterns, difficulty in transitioning, moving away from, holding others in mind. Um, so sharing attention, being flexible, being able to think about the other, being able to take the other into consideration. Um, because during this period and, leading up to this period, if there hasn't been safety and there hasn't been care, then it doesn't make sense for the child to be preoccupied with the needs of another. They've got to be preoccupied with themselves in order to survive, ultimately, in a way. Wouldn't you say, Karen?
Yeah, I would. And what came to my mind, Tara, is when you were saying about not being aware of the other, how we might see it as well is that they're not aware of the toys.
Hmm.
You know, they break them, or their attention to them is really, really poor. The way in which they go to them perhaps is there's a lack of curiosity, or actually it's very kind of aggressive, etc. So we can see this playing out in the therapy space, absolutely. Yes.